I don't think that people understand that Palestinians are human beings. They think that they are just objects.
It feels like basic journalistic rules, fact checks, impartiality, they just go out of the window for the British media when it comes to this single issue of Israel.
Larger parts of the media are bloodstained.
When the history books are written, do you think David Cameron will be seen as central to the UK's role in this complicity in genocide?
Tony Blair, who oversaw war crimes, sending him off to Gaza, is horrible.
You, a small C conservative, have become more and more critical of Israel. Have you had to deal with accusations of anti-Semitism from former friends of yours on the right? More than 2 years into Israel's genocide in Gaza, a new book has painted a damning indictment of the UK's role in aiding Israel in its assault that has killed tens and tens of thousands of Palestinians. The book is called Complicit, Britain's Role in the Destruction of Gaza. It examines how both the Conservative and Labour parties aligned in their support for Israel's genocide and how the British media also helped sustain that support. The book is written by longtime journalist, broadcaster and author Peter Oborne, who used to serve as the chief political columnist for the Daily Telegraph and who now writes for Middle East Eye. Peter Oborne joins me now. Peter, thanks so much for coming on the show.
It's a real pleasure, Mehdi. Thank you for asking.
No, great to see you again. Important book. Before we get to the substance of the book, let's just talk about some of the news that's related to your book. Right now, there is a big controversy in the UK after Maccabi Tel Aviv football fans, hooligans, I would argue, were banned from attending a Europa League game at Aston Villa in November by Birmingham's Safety Advisory Group and by local police. The British media political establishment went crazy. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer called it the wrong decision. Others screamed anti-Semitism. You wrote about the scandal in the Middle East Eye, saying anyone with the faintest sense of decency or even basic patriotism must be appalled by the prospect of violent hooligans marching through British streets chanting their murderous, obscene and genocidal songs. That seems undeniable. So why, Peter, you're a long-time observer of the British media establishment, political establishment, you know a lot of these people personally, Starmer, Badenoch, Davey, Farage, all of the party leaders, except for the Green leader, chose to go and fight on behalf of foreign football hooligans. Why?
It's very interesting. It illustrates one of the big themes of the book I've just written, actually, which is the cross-party cartel, which formed two years ago after the 7th of October and threw its weight behind Netanyahu's atrocities and has continued to support 2 years on after, as you say, sort of tens and tens and tens of thousands of people have been slaughtered in Gaza. Most experts regard it as a genocide, and yet the cross-party support for Israel persists, and criticism of Israel is projected as over the last few days here as anti-Semitism, when there's no evidence for that at all. So well, you ask why this has happened.
Well, how do you explain the entire political leadership coming out and making... This was a top issue in the UK for the last few days. It's been the top news story. Even though polls show the British public don't support these fans coming. And yet every British politician seems to have gone out of their way to defend these Maccabi Tel Aviv fans and say it's anti-Semitism. Liking this video? Then don't just watch. Hit like, share and subscribe. And tap the bell so you never miss a video or live show. But if you want early access to exclusive content, then you have to head to zeteo.com and subscribe now. You'll be supporting fearless, independent journalism.
And not just the politicians, by the way, also the media is part of it. It's a part of the cross-party political media consensus here. Now, I thought very deep. I've written a piece about it today, which you mentioned. At the heart of it is the far-right narrative, which convulses British politics. Much of it has come over from the United States, from Trump and his allies. And I can only explain the fact that a supposedly progressive leader like Starmer should have made this bizarre decision to take on the West Midlands police, who made, on the basis of safety grounds, the decision not to allow Maccabi supporters to come to Britain. Now, Starmer went against that. The initiative came. They went after an independent MP called Ayub Khan for Paribas in the Birmingham area who'd pressed for this not to take place. And he was projected as an anti-Semite, as it was horrible to see the racist attacks. There was one...
They call him sectarian, Peter. Sectarian, that's the new word of choice.
This is a very interesting new word. I'm going to be writing about this with my colleague Imran Mullah in Middle East Eye. Every so often a word crops up, weapons of mass destruction. You recollect that ahead of the Iraq War. Islamist was a more recent one. Islamist meant, it was a word for if you didn't like Muslims, but you didn't want to say so, you used the word Islamist. Now sectarian, and it means you don't belong.
Yeah.
And it needs careful analysis. I think it's unusually for neologisms like this. It comes from Britain. I don't think it started off in the United States.
No, I think you're right. Peter, Sky News had to just put out a correction on air saying, we didn't mention to you, by the way, while we were reporting last week, that the football fans from Maccabi have a record of violence. It feels like basic journalistic rules, fact checks, impartiality, they just go out of the window for the British media when it comes to this single issue of Israel.
Exactly so. And there's an important antecedent to this. A year ago, you may remember when there were reports of a pogrom in Amsterdam when Maccabi fans were there. But then it was reported in the media as an anti-Jewish pogrom. And the Sky TV... many brought the BBC, quite a number of the world's broadcasters showed footage taken by Annette, a photographer.
Yes, she was on our show.
Yeah, she's outstanding, a real force for good. They showed footage, which they said showed Jews being attacked by local people. Actually, it was footage which showed the Maccabi supporters attacking the local people. Sky was involved in this, and the BBC. Now, so they seem to have a compulsive urge to misreport these kind of events because they want to tell a particular narrative, a narrative which always presents Muslims in an especially bad light.
Yes. And in the book, you point out that this is not accidental, this is not spontaneous, this is not impulsive. This is systematic. You cite a Centre for Media Monitoring study published back in June that analysed the BBC's coverage of Gaza during the first year after October 7th. And that study found the BBC was twice as likely to interview an Israeli as a Palestinian. And the average Israeli death received 33 times more coverage in BBC articles than the average Palestinian death. How do you assess, you talk about, the book is called, your book's called Complicit, right? How complicit is the British media in the genocide in Gaza, in your view? The
British media, large sections of it, not all. I exclude the Financial Times, which has been straight in its reporting, not pro-Palestinian, just straight.
Yes.
In its body, but larger parts of the media are bloodstained for two reasons. One is they supported the British government narrative that Israel wasn't committing war crimes. The British government still says that, or it's still its formal position, and that Netanyahu was given a green light to do whatever he wants and be supplying him with arms. They didn't make anything of that, but they did another thing, which was not just authenticate the British government support for Netanyahu, but also to attack the protesters.
Yes.
It very much upset me, this, because over the last 2 years, the protesters, an enormous number of people have turned out week after week after week, rain and shine, to protest against British government policy, selling arms, etc., to Israel, but also calling for a ceasefire. They have been smeared as anti-Semites, sort of terrorism supporters.
They've been criminalised, Peter, right? They've been criminalised. They've been criminalised and arrested.
And indeed been criminalised. And I partly in the end up found myself feeling that this, showing that these claims made against them that they were violent were false. and also pointing out something very significant. Actually, it is they, the protesters against, who are on the side of the rule of law, on the side of international law, of the United Nations, Amnesty International, all of these civil society bodies, of the Anglo-American order, which we, our two great countries, set up in 1945, Churchill and Roosevelt on that boat outside Northumberland saying this will never happen. What the horror of the 30s and 40s will never happen again. That is what they're supporting, bizarrely. Whereas Britain, Israel, and I'm afraid the governments in the States are hostile to the international order. They're trying to undermine very successfully the ICC, the UN, etc.
So you mentioned the arrests. Obviously, the UK government prescribed Palestine Action as a terrorist organisation under the Terrorism Act, compared it to ISIS and Al-Qaeda. You have little old ladies and blind people and men in wheelchairs being carted off by the police. It's astonishing that Keir Starmer is a Labour Prime Minister, to borrow a line from Neil Kinnock, a Labour Prime Minister doing this to protesters, a former human rights lawyer. You write in the book about him, you say even Joe Biden's White House expressed surprise that the British Prime Minister stuck his neck out so far in sending unequivocal backing in Netanyahu. That is quite the indictment of Starmer if Joe Biden thinks you're being too pro-Israel when Joe Biden gave Netanyahu everything he wanted.
Yes, I think Starmer's decision, remember, when it started, he was leader of the opposition. He was determined to become prime minister, but he didn't want to make any false steps. And I think he said quite explicitly to people around him, look, I'm sticking to the Democratic president, come what may. And he did. And he didn't want to, he didn't want to frighten the horses, didn't want to frighten the establishment, the military, political, intelligence establishments. And that was his policy, hence that early terrible thing he said, supporting collective punishments in Gaza.
So in the US, Peter, we all know about AIPAC and the prominence of the pro-Israel lobby in politics. What does that lobby look like in the UK? Is there a pro-Israel lobby in the UK that's influencing British Conservatives, British Labour politicians as well?
I devote a chapter to the pro-Israel lobby in Britain. It's not as formidable as AIPAC, but nevertheless, nor is it as important in structuring British policy towards Gaza and Israel as the Britain's determination to support the special relationship, as we regard it rather pathetically, with the United States. Nevertheless, the Labour Friends of Israel, particularly in recent years, the Conservative Friends of Israel, have been extremely effective lobby groups in getting what they in promoting policies. For instance, they nearly got the Britain to follow Trump and move the US embassy. They were very effective in killing off the BDS, in promoting the killing off of the BDS. They've affected something which, by the way, Maggie Thatcher, for all of her many accused of being all sorts of outrageous things, but very pro-Israel, but she would never have allowed them to anybody to tell her who she could appoint as a minister. But there's massive evidence that the Conservative Friends of Israel were able to put the kibosh of the appointment of Sir Alan Duncan, Middle East minister, and so on. There's a lot more. There's a lot of evidence that they've been formidable.
I want to come back to the Conservatives and Alan Duncan. Just on Labour, when you look at someone like Shabana Mahmood, the new Home Secretary, she has gone from speaking at pro-Palestine rallies to now criminalising people at pro-Palestine rallies. Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary, has gone from calling for an arms embargo against Israel in 2018 in the House of Commons as a backbencher to now being in government and basically smearing people who are opposed to Israel, as she did in the Commons the other day. How do you explain those kind of U-turns? Is that just politicians selling out to lobbies? Is that British politicians on the left saying, well, I have to be pro-Israel in order to get ahead in my career? How do you, as someone who spent a lot of time in Westminster, how do you explain those kind of sharp pivots?
we have to ask them, and of course they're not. It's difficult to do that, and they will give us weird answers.
Yes.
By the way, it also applies very much to Keir Starmer. There's a famous picture of Starmer with giving a speech in the 2015 election with a poster saying "Kick Israeli racism out of FIFA." Now, his last few days, he's been trying to bring Israeli racism.
But I feel like Starmer is never believed anything to begin with. I feel like Shabana Mahmood and Lisa Nandy were actually pro-Palestine at the time, and now they're not. And I'm trying to understand how you think they can. Is that just political pressure? Is that people just saying this is how you get ahead in British politics?
I think there is something. I want to wait and see if Shabana Mahmood can improve.
Okay.
She's very recently Home Secretary, and I'm looking. There has been, let's frame it in this way. If you look back to the Conservative government, Suella Braverman, Priti Patel, James Cleverly, and so forth, these are all black politicians who've done incredibly well. Quite a lot of other ones, Asian heritage. And actually, the rise, Sunak, he was a fascinating moment. But the emergence of very senior black or Asian background figures at the top of British government coincided with levels of racism, open and Islamophobia, which we haven't seen in this country since Enoch Powell.
Yes,
and it's a very delicate thing to talk about.
Yes,
but you've got to observe this: that if you are the Conservative Party and you want to promote racist policies, it's jolly helpful to have a black or Asian person right at the top of the party.
You're a brave man to point that out. I think many people would agree with you, but people don't like that being pointed out.
It is a brave man, but it is brave. I
think you're undeniably correct. It is much easier to push racist policies if you have a brown prime minister. I think that's undeniable. Rishi Sunak was the prime minister before Keir Starmer. The Conservatives were in power for nearly a year after October the 7th. They presided over the quote-unquote first half of the genocide, if you can call it that. David Cameron, a man you know very well. He was Prime Minister between 2010 and 2015. He comes back as Lord Cameron, Foreign Secretary. He's seen as someone who might be sympathetic towards the Palestinians because he famously called Gaza an open-air prison or whatever it was. He comes in, starts talking about a ceasefire, but then he's the guy who, is there when the UK is abstaining on a UN Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire. He's the guy who refused to accept the ICJ's provisional ruling on Gaza. He's the guy who helped suspend British funding to UNRWA. When the history books are written, do you think David Cameron will be seen as central to the UK's role in this complicity in genocide?
I think that David Cameron made a series of terrible decisions, having become
apparently he also threatened Karim Khan, the ICC chief prosecutor.
Middle East Eye has
reported by your news organisation. Yes.
Yeah, and the New Yorker has recently run a very important piece, sort of repeating our story. Without attribution, by the way, but I'm sure they will. I was jolly glad to see. Yeah, but in other words, Cameron has been. If you think about the importance of this, let's just assume what Cameron's friends accept privately. Cameron rang up a Karim Khan and said, "It's not a very good idea, old chap. I just leave this one alone,
Yes.
Let it go right outside the old stump, just don't." And that in itself would be an interference by the Foreign Secretary ringing up the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, now, which is meant to be an independent organisation, immune from political pressure, to go after wrongdoers, and they have to. The stakes are pretty. In this case, we were talking about none other than the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Yoav Gallant. Yes. Now, accusing them of the most abominable, terrible crimes against humanity.
So Peter, let me be blunt. How disappointed, how shocked are you? You're reporting out this story at Middle East Eye. This is David Cameron, a man who you used to be an admirer of.
Very much so, and I cannot understand what David Cameron thought he was, any British Foreign Secretary thought he was doing. By the way, while I'm at it, can I just say to the rest of the mainstream British press, time to follow our story up,
Yes.
Because
well said.
they're deferential, they say, no, we can't publish difficult stories for the British political establishment. Oh, no, absolutely not, we're all good chaps. And
Yeah, they haven't touched the story. It's outrageous. Peter,
Yes.
on a personal level, the Conservative Party in recent years has become more and more pro-Israel. It's no longer really home to people like Alan Duncan, who you mentioned, quote-unquote Arabists, who used to be in the Conservative Party. I remember people like Douglas Hurd when I was a kid. At the same time as that's been happening, you, a small c Conservative, have become more and more critical of Israel and more sympathetic to the Palestinians, I think it's fair to say. What has driven that journey of yours? And have you had to deal with accusations of anti-Semitism from former friends of yours on the right?
Of course I have, but I tell you something, I don't think I've moved all that much. If you go back to Maggie Thatcher, she was a pro-Israel, very pro-Israel figure, very, very much opposed to anti-Semitism, and yet she never had the slightest doubt that when Israel committed acts of barbarism like Sabra and Shatila in Lebanon in '82, even the bombing of the Bushehr nuclear reactor, she came out fighting and told Israel, this is unacceptable, you mustn't do it. And she spoke out, and she was fascinated. I unearthed a conversation, an interview by a lovely journalist, Monty Modlin of the Jewish Chronicle, with Maggie Thatcher after she had condemned Israeli, used very words like barbarism, I think, and he accused her of selling out Israel. She said, no. International law is all we have. We must never abandon it. That's a lecture on and of course Thatcher, remember this, Thatcher had been a child through World War II.
Yes.
She knew what happened if you let international law
But that is not the party of Kemi Badenoch. That is certainly not the party of Nigel Farage. You, on the other hand, I think are someone who is a Conservative and is clinging to that vision. And I'm just wondering, how have you had to deal with some of the backlash to that?
Well, you have just actually to ignore it. It's very cheap, the stuff you get aimed at you, Yeah. I mean, I'm being permanently accused of working for Qatar for some reason.
Welcome to my world, Peter. Welcome to my world.
Yes. And, a lot of these people are my friends, and they're still my friends. Some aren't, it's difficult. But do you know what, yes. Mehdi? The job of a journalist is to tell what you see as the truth as best you can.
In the US, Peter, we're seeing a rift among Republicans, MAGA folks, when it comes to support for Israel. People like Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene are starting to take quite strong, vociferous stances against Israel. They're also accused of being funded by Qatar. Do you see a significant shift on the right in the West, or at least a division amongst conservatives in the West when it comes to Israel now?
I was expecting that, because British politics so often follows the United States, but we haven't seen that. In Farage is so far has been completely pro.
Rupert Lowe, yes.
And also presently we have Tommy Robinson, this thug, is in Israel and occupied East Jerusalem. I saw him in the other day. There's been no sign of it. I think we will see it. But we have, because remember, underneath all of this pro-Israel stuff, and they like the fact that Israel goes after Arabs. They love that, but they also bitterly, hideously anti-Semitic.
Yes,
and that is going to come through at some point, I think.
So before we wrap up, I got to ask about the current so-called peace plan, the Gaza ceasefire that Trump has brought about. A, do you believe it can hold, if it's even holding, as they continue to kill Palestinians? And B, what do you think of our former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, being floated for a role as supervisor of the Gaza International Transitional Authority, the Board of Peace?
The presence of Tony Blair, who oversaw war crimes really horrible war crimes committed by British troops, in Iraq, sending him off to Gaza is horrible, and also the basic racism of it. Well, are there any Palestinians? Tony Blair's welcome to kind of do something or other there at the senior level, but what about the Palestinians? It's deeply offensive. I followed Blair's post-office career. I've looked at the way he worked in the quartet. He turned up for a few days once a month. He was basically an ally, as I understood it. It looked to me like a sort of operative for Israel, or a great friend and ally of Ehud Barak and so on, while he was doing that job. He did hardly win. So I think that's, as for the peace deal, I went to the West Bank 2 weeks ago. And do you know there's no mention of it? And yet, what is going on in the West Bank? I spoke to people who had been attacked by settlers in the last few weeks. These are fascist militias erasing villages, supplied, paid for, funded, armed by the state, given total license and immunity by the Netanyahu government to murder, erase, destroy ancient cultures. This is going on at the moment. And why isn't that mentioned in the peace deal? Because, it's only speculation, I don't know, but is that how Netanyahu and Trump and co kept the far right, kept the fascist rights, the Smotriches, on board to say you can carry on ethnically cleansing and destroying the West Bank in return for maybe a temporary ceasefire in Gaza?
I mean, we're speaking in the same week that J.D. Vance went to Israel, and while he was in Israel, the Israeli parliament announced that they're voting on the annexation of the West Bank, which Donald Trump said he would stop.
Very underreported in Britain, by the way.
Of course, as we'll end the interview as we started, saying how bad the British media are on this interview. Last question, Peter. You write about an overpowering question you grappled with while doing research for the book. You say, how is it that so many British public figures, both politicians and journalists, have been happy to justify, enable, and in some cases actually to applaud Israeli atrocities and the slaughter of Palestinian civilians? How would you answer that question? How is it possible for them to do that?
I think there's an underlying racism at the heart of British, as there is, of course, in the United States society. I don't think that people understand that Palestinians are human beings. I think they think that they are just objects. They don't count. I think that's part of it. There are other reasons. There's also honourable reasons, I should say. People honourably believe that Israel is an embattled democracy. Anti-Semitism has forced Israelis to go there, and they stand for something magnificent. There is that honourable belief because people continue to hold it, but it's difficult to continue to hold it. I think impossible. While having taken account of the conduct of the IDF in Gaza and the West Bank in the last 2 years.
I think it's hard to disagree with that assessment. The book is called Complicit, Britain's Role in the Destruction of Gaza. Peter Oborne, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mehdi.
Did you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and turn on notifications. For exclusive content and to support our independent, unfiltered journalism, head over to zeteo.com. Your support matters.